Hi guys. Those of you who commented on last week's video about how I should have been happy with the result and to not rip it up, I had already ripped it up at that point. But hopefully after watching this video, you'll agree that I made the right choice. The first thing to amend was the width of the stream. This was a constant grumble that I had with version 1. So before I start going in with the stream itself, I need to make a new bank. As this one will be going off scene towards the viewer, I need to add a retaining wall at the front, which I'll cut out of scrap Foamex. And as a curveball to my usual methods, I'll be using no more nails to glue it down. The reason I chose this was because it should act as a filler between that and the wooden edging already in place, and it's been in my drawer for years. This stuff is thick, which I like. And I'm wearing a glove like a good boy to prevent it from setting into my fingerprints. Though, to be fair, that would have increased my bank robbing skills. Not that I have time to rob any banks these days. And to be honest, the banks all around here have closed their local branches. And with the price of diesel, I'm not really willing to drive to the nearest one. Anyway, this will need a few hours to start to set, and a good day to set fully rock hard. The Foamex is here to stay, so I can get to work on a second issue with the first version. And that was how uniform the stream's journey across the board was. As I showed in the last video with the use of my 100-year-old iPad, it's a very jaggedy and twisty stream. To replicate that, I'll whip out the wall filler, and with a glove donned hand, because I'm really good at remembering to put them on now, I'll begin to build up little embankments going down the stream edges. Aside from contortion in the stream, which I don't think is a real word, this also really gets that narrow feel that I had hoped for. I've worked out that it doesn't actually matter how much care you put into this job, because rough and random edges only add to the look. And with all that looking good, I can now repeat the steps from the first version, which means add in various size slate pieces and ballast to the stream bed. I'll glue all that down with ballast bond and leave it overnight to set. I'll then switch over to the embankments and bring them back up to speed. I do like the look of the moss over the tops, so ended up doing that bit again. Though eventually most of this will be covered with larger plants such as ferns as well as leaf scatters. PVA is a good choice for this type of scenery as it can be added in tiny drops or spread over large surfaces such as this. The flock is then sprinkled over the glue. It's probably quite obvious at this point, but never do this when your ballast bond on a stream bed is still wet, as any flock that falls onto it will stick. When that's dry, the entire area gets blasted with black primer, which will act as both a primer layer and a shadow layer for the following colours. It also makes me feel like I know what I'm doing when in fact I don't. With the airbrush out, I might as well crack on with painting the rocky outcrops. I'll be using the same greys as the first attempt here, as the rock colouring was one of the only parts that I was actually kind of happy on about the first go. Though this time there won't be a lot of rock showing. Step 2 for painting the rocks is adding a dry brush layer of lighter shades. You'll notice this pattern when I paint a lot of areas on the layout. And that's going on with a primary base coat first, then the highlights and then finally the shadows. I do it in this order because I find the highlights are a bit too bright if they're left till last. Moving on to the areas of ground around the rocks with a classic coat of earth brown. This land will eventually be covered with ferns and bracken and things like that, so really only needs a rough base coat to cover any filler that might show through if scenic material gets knocked off. I really like using the airbrush because it gives nice soft blends between the muddy ground and the rocks. This can then get touched up with my lovely slimy grime. If you follow me on Instagram, you'd have seen my new bottle replacements of this, as I finally ran out of this one, and the colour is almost completely different. Obviously it would be a different batch, but it actually looks like a completely different shade of green, so sadness consumes me. I'll probably end up adding other colours to mix it in as close as I can get to the original colour, which has a much more nice mossy tone. Here's the shadow layer I mentioned before. I've left it until after adding the green because it'll soak a little bit up the flock, which again helps add a nice natural transition. This is actually the black ink, the very same black ink from the slate fence a few weeks back, which did end up drying better than it looked wet. Enough that I'm happy to use it for the rest of my life. The area will eventually get plenty of additional scenic work, but for now, what I've got here is enough to let me add the water. And here's that UV resin once again. This actually came as a 2-pack, so I'm lucky enough to have a second one to finish this attempt. And with the new shape of the stream being so much more narrow, I'll be using a lot less resin. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but this stuff is pretty viscous, which means that when you pour it, it's loose enough to settle into little crevices and form a more level layer, but thick enough not to just run off the stream, which you tend to find normal 2-part resin does. So I'll start at the top of the stream and begin to make my way down towards the board edge where the stream runs off scene. And as I get far enough down from the starting point, I'll set off the UV lamp to start the curing process for that part. As I move down the stream, the UV lamp will move along behind me. It seems a logical, sensible approach, which is something I'm trying these days. The UV lamp has been on long enough to set the stream solid, so I should crack on with the surface details. I was aware from the beginning that this would need to be done in a few different layers, and I'll start with Mod Podge. This is dappled onto the surface of the resin, with enough to cover the surface but not enough to start pooling. And once applied, I'll blow at it through a straw, causing it to dry in miniature ripples. The first stream attempted had a very calm look to the surface, and as this was meant to be white water stream water, it needs to have more pizzazz. So to get said pizzazz, I'll be trying a new technique, which I've seen on a number of different builds to great success, so at least if I get moderate success, I'll be winning. This is clear silicone, the type that you bead around your bath or shower after refusing to pay the plumber's rate. Once it's mixed with a bit of IPA, it's quite mouldable. So it's plopped onto the stream surface with one of my special rubber tip brushes designed for clay sculpting that I bought years ago until today found absolutely no use for, because I don't sculpt clay. And then it gets gently shaped into something that resembles the form of water. This is one of those jobs that really needs reference photos, because water isn't random. It has logic in its movement, so care is taken to try and capture that. Not that I did a very good job, but it's my first go, so be kind. The silicone is left to cure, and I say cure and not harden because it stays almost rubbery, well, being silicone. So anyway, once it's gone rubbery, I'll dry brush froth onto the tips of the waves. This is quite a delicate process because it's really easy to overdo it and ruin the illusion. And remember that this acrylic will have a matte finish, so if I use too much I'll lose the water effect from the surface. I found that plain white is almost too pure, and white water tends to stir up a lot of crap from the stream bed, and can appear off-white or creamy coloured. So I use an off-white or creamy colour for the bulk of the froth, and then I went back over with a pure white for the tips, which seems plausible. And finally I wanted to add pools of froth after any little drops in height. Just painting more white on the surface wouldn't really give that frothy look here, so I was bold, and I used some random snow effect product that I had in a drawer from last Christmas, when I built that Christmas shelf layout that actually finishes on eBay tonight, with a link in the video's description if you'd want to bid on it and buy it for me, thank you. It was added quite heavily, which gives a really nice 3D finish. And there we have it. Possibly a better solution to the stream than the first one. No, it is better, I'm much happier. When it's covered in scenery and leaf scatters it'll look better still. Well done me for believing in my gut. Lovely wise gut. Cheers.